You weren't low maintenance. You were self-abandoning. You called it being chill, being understanding, being easy. But what you were really doing was making yourself smaller, so no one would leave. You thought love required less of you, less emotion, less need, less voice, less expectation. You thought being low maintenance made you lovable, but it only made you invisible. And the shift, the real shift, happens the moment you stop auditioning for comfort and start honoring your own discomfort. Somewhere along the way, you learned that having needs pushes people away. Maybe you were told you were too sensitive, too emotional, too demanding, too intense. So you adapted. You became flexible. You became accommodating. You became easy. You swallowed disappointment before it could turn into conflict. You told yourself, it's not a big deal. Even when it was. You said, I'm fine. Even when you weren't. You convinced yourself that maturity meant tolerance. But tolerance, without boundaries, is self-erasure. Being low maintenance often looks like strength. You don't complain. You don't ask for much. You don't react dramatically. You don't need reassurance. You don't demand effort. On the surface, it looks secure, but underneath, it can be fear. Fear of being too much. Fear of being replaced. Fear of being labeled difficult. Fear of losing connection. So you preemptively shrink. You pre-reject your own needs before someone else can. That is self-abandonment, and it hides beautifully inside the identity of the cool girl, the understanding partner, the ride or die, the I don't need much woman. But here's what happens when you constantly minimize yourself. You attract people who prefer minimal effort. You attract dynamics where your silence is convenient. You attract partners who feel safe because you don't require growth. Low maintenance doesn't intimidate immaturity, it accommodates it. And over time, you start feeling tired, not because you're needy, but because you're unseen. You start feeling resentment you can't quite name. You start feeling distance inside a connection that looks fine from the outside. You start asking yourself, why do I feel alone, even when I'm loved? Because you are loved for your convenience, not your fullness. And the shift begins when that realization becomes too loud to ignore. It begins when you get tired of pretending you don't care, when you get tired of being the calm one while your needs go unmet, when you get tired of calling your silence peace. Silence is not peace if it costs you yourself. And here's the truth that changes everything. You were never high maintenance. You were just underexpressed. And underexpression creates internal tension because your nervous system knows when you are abandoning yourself to keep someone else comfortable. That tension builds, and eventually, it turns into a shift. Not loud, not dramatic, but decisive. You stop saying it's fine. You start saying, that doesn't work for me. You stop over-accommodating. You start observing effort. You stop being endlessly understanding. You start requiring reciprocity. And suddenly, you're not low maintenance anymore. You're self-respecting. Let's go deeper. No one wakes up one day and decides to abandon themselves. It's learned. It's conditioned. It's adaptive. Somewhere in your story, you realized that love felt safer when you required less. Maybe your emotions were dismissed. Maybe conflict led to withdrawal. Maybe expressing needs made someone cold. So your nervous system made a calculation. Less need equals more safety. Less voice equals less rejection. Less expectation equals less disappointment. And that adaptation worked. It kept connection. It reduced tension. It made you agreeable. But it also slowly disconnected you from yourself. Because attachment wounds don't always look dramatic. Sometimes they look like independence. Sometimes they look like I don't need anyone. Sometimes they look like I'm just easygoing. But underneath is hyper-awareness. You scan the room for shifts in tone. You adjust before being asked. You overgive before someone can accuse you of not caring enough. You manage emotions that aren't yours. You anticipate needs that were never spoken. That is not ease. That is vigilance. Low maintenance is often high anxiety, disguised as chill energy. You don't ask for reassurance because you fear being seen as insecure. You don't ask for clarity because you fear being labeled intense. You don't ask for effort because you fear being too demanding. So you become the flexible one, the adaptable one, the one who says, I get it, even when you don't, even when it hurts. Here's the psychological truth. When you suppress needs to maintain connection, you create imbalance. And imbalance always favors the less invested person. The one who asks for less usually gives more. The one who needs less usually tolerates more. The one who speaks less usually absorbs more. And over time, this dynamic rewires you. You start believing your needs are optional. You start believing effort is a bonus. You start believing reciprocity is rare. You normalize crumbs and call it peace. But peace without expression is not peace. It's suppression. And suppression always leaks. It leaks as exhaustion. It leaks as resentment. It leaks as emotional numbness. It leaks as sudden withdrawal. After years of tolerance, that's when people say, you changed. But what really happened is you stopped self-abandoning. You stopped negotiating with your own discomfort. You stopped translating disrespect into patience. You stopped calling bare minimum potential. And that shift feels dramatic to someone who benefited from your silence. Because when you were low maintenance, they felt secure, not because they were meeting you, but because they weren't required to. Now something inside you feels different. You feel irritation where you used to feel empathy. You feel clarity where you used to feel confusion. You feel firmness where you used to feel flexibility. That's not bitterness. That's alignment. Your nervous system is recalibrating. It's realizing that safety doesn't come from minimizing yourself. It comes from being met. And here's the uncomfortable part. When you stop being low maintenance, some connections won't survive. Not because you became difficult, but because you became equal. Equality exposes imbalance. Equality requires effort. Equality demands presence. And not everyone is prepared for that. But the version of you that keeps shrinking to be digestible is no longer sustainable. You are tired of translating your silence into love. You are tired of being chosen for how little you require. You are tired of calling self-denial strength. And this tiredness is sacred because it signals growth. The shift happens when pleasing no longer feels like protection, when over-understanding no longer feels noble, when disappearing no longer feels safe. That's when your voice starts returning, quiet at first, but steady. And once it returns, you will never again confuse low maintenance with love. Here's what no one prepares you for. When you stop trying to be low maintenance, it feels wrong at first, not empowering, not glamorous, wrong, because your nervous system has been trained to associate silence with safety, to associate self-suppression with stability, to associate low expectation with lower risk. So the first time you say, "That actually bothered me," your heart races. The first time you say, "I need more consistency than that," your stomach tightens. The first time you don't laugh something off, just to keep the mood light, you feel exposed. Why? Because you are no longer hiding. You are no longer buffering reality. To protect connection, you are letting your needs exist without apology. And that feels terrifying. When you've built an identity around being easy, you start worrying. Am I being dramatic? Am I overreacting? Am I pushing too hard? Am I becoming high maintenance? Notice how quickly you question yourself. That's conditioning. That's the old survival script, trying to pull you back into familiarity. But here's the deeper truth. Healthy love does not collapse under the weight of honest needs. It adjusts. It listens. It responds. If expressing yourself destroys the connection, it wasn't stable. It was dependent on your silence. And silence is not a foundation. It's a delay. When you begin expressing needs, something else shifts too. You stop performing calmness. You stop performing indifference. You stop performing cool. You become real. And real requires courage. Because now, if someone walks away, they're walking away from the authentic you, not the filtered version, not the easy version, not the hyper-flexible version. And that vulnerability feels risky, but it's clean. There's no confusion, no hidden resentment, no silent tally of disappointments. Just clarity. This is where many women misinterpret growth. They think becoming more vocal will make them harder to love. But the opposite happens. You become harder to exploit, harder to underserve, harder to emotionally bypass. And that doesn't repel healthy people. It filters out avoidant ones. It filters out inconsistent ones. It filters out those who only felt powerful when you required nothing. Here's the psychological shift that defines this stage. You stop seeing your needs as burdens. You start seeing them as information. Information about compatibility. Information about capacity. Information about alignment. If someone cannot meet your needs, that doesn't mean you're too much. It means they are not equipped. And not being equipped is not a crime. But pretending you don't need what you need is self-betrayal. And you are done betraying yourself. There will be moments where people resist this new version of you. They may say, "You've changed. You used to be so easygoing. You're more demanding now." Listen carefully. What they often mean is, "You no longer make this easy for me." Growth feels like pressure to those who benefited from your self-neglect. But pressure is not cruelty. Pressure is clarity. You are no longer bending to keep peace. You are redefining peace as mutual respect. And something surprising happens. Your anxiety decreases. Your overthinking softens. Your resentment fades. Because you're not carrying unspoken needs anymore. You're not silently negotiating with yourself. You're aligned. And alignment is deeply regulating. It may reduce your dating pool. It may challenge existing dynamics. It may make you appear stronger. But it also attracts a different level of love. The kind that doesn't rely on you being small. The kind that doesn't need you to be low maintenance. The kind that values your voice. And once you experience being met instead of tolerated, you will never again romanticize being easy, because you'll realize being low maintenance was never about love. It was about fear. And fear is no longer running you. Here's the integration. You were never easy to love. You were easy to accommodate because you accommodated everyone first. You removed friction. You removed expectations. You removed inconvenience. And in doing that, you removed yourself. But love is not proven by how little space you take up. It's revealed by how safely you can take up space. The shift that happens when you stop trying to be low maintenance is not loud. It's not dramatic. It's not rebellious. It's internal. You stop volunteering to be the smaller energy in the room. You stop translating your needs into something more digestible. You stop cushioning your truth so it lands softly for others. You start saying things plainly. You start holding eye contact. When you speak, you stop over-smiling to soften boundaries. You stop over-explaining to justify standards. And suddenly, you feel solid, not rigid, not cold, solid, because you are no longer negotiating with your own intuition. You are no longer trying to win love by losing yourself. Here's the quiet power in that. The right people will not feel burdened by your needs. They will feel guided by them. They won't interpret your standards as criticism. They will interpret them as clarity. They won't shrink because you expanded. They will rise. And if someone falls away, when you stop being low maintenance, that is not failure. That is filtration. You are filtering out those who only felt comfortable when you were self-silencing, when you were endlessly adaptable, when you were emotionally convenient. Convenience is not intimacy. Compatibility is not built on one person bending, and peace is not built on one person swallowing. The woman who tries to be low maintenance often believes, I just don't want to be a problem. But having needs does not make you a problem. It makes you human. The real problem is believing you must disappear to be loved. That belief ends here. You are allowed to want reassurance. You are allowed to want effort. You are allowed to want consistency. You are allowed to want depth. And you are allowed to walk away from anything that only works when you are smaller. That is the shift. Not becoming demanding, not becoming rigid, becoming aligned. Aligned women do not chase comfort at the expense of truth. Aligned women do not compete with their own intuition. Aligned women do not call self-erasure maturity. They call it what it is, and they stop. So if you feel the shift happening, if you feel yourself less willing to tolerate, less eager to over-accommodate, less interested in being the cool girl, don't panic. You are not becoming high maintenance. You are becoming self-honoring. And that is the safest place you will ever live. If this resonated, comment no more shrinking. Let this be the moment you stop negotiating with your own needs. Share this with the woman who still thinks being easy is the key to being chosen. And if you're ready to build love, that doesn't require self-abandonment. Subscribe to Depth of Us, because here, we don't teach women how to be convenient. We remind them they are allowed to be whole.